it is, as Mill puts it, and interestingly, Mill himself draws on the example of racial classification, a natural kind is that category or set of things that continually yields up more properties in common than the properties on the basis of which one initially classified them together. So let me give an example. Mill's example is the example of white things, not white people, but white things. So we go and we get all the white things in the universe and we place them together, and then we ask, what do these things have in common? Well, nothing beyond the fact that they're all white. So white things doesn't constitute a natural kind for John Stuart Mill, unlike, say, Mill's paradigmatically preferred natural kinds, chemical elements from the periodic table, things like sulfur and aluminum and silver and things like that. We've been studying sulfur for millennia, and the more we study it, the more we discover properties we didn't know about before, all perpetually reinforcing our initial decision to categorize all the clumps of sulfur in the world together. That's what a natural kind is. So, unfortunately, there are not only natural kinds, there are also social kinds. And these are much more difficult and intractable, in part because the way we go about classifying the social world is in part in a so-called, or so to speak, feedback loop with the objects of our classificatory activity, right? And this is what the Canadian philosopher of science, Ian Hacking, calls the looping effect in social kinds, right? You have a loop between the things being classified and the activity of classification, such that the classificatory activity itself has an effect on whether these things are considered to be existent or merely illusory. The more we talk about them, in other words, the more they seem to exist. Be prepared to make the rather bold claim that almost no social kinds actually exist, right? At least not in the way gold and silver and sulfur do. Maybe mother, that's a pretty solid one. There's a Chinese anthropologist, Kai Hua, who says that father is not a universal social kind, that there are cultures that lack the concept. I guess mother would also entail the existence of child, but you get much further than that, those kind of very, very basic social categories, and you're drifting off into questions of cultural specificity. So you have cases, and I can think of, let's say, the social production of context-specific cultural roles, like shaman, right? Shaman is a good example of something that exists in some places, that seems very real where it exists, and yet I think we agree that a person is not born with shamanism in them in the way that a person is born with, say, Down syndrome. It's something that is contextually meaningful and contextually specific. In general, for other such new social kinds, they have been somewhat more long-lasting, the sort that interest Hacking in the field of the diagnosis of mental illnesses. And here Hacking is building on a background of work that might be more familiar, namely that of Michel Foucault on sexual orientation, right? And of course his famous argument is that until the 19th century, there were no homosexuals as kinds of people. There were just people who did homosexual things, right? And I think this is a nice example because it really kind of draws out the difference between, let's say, the broad category of human beings, the universal human category within which there might be dispositions or propensities, then in the 19th century, if Foucault is correct in his analysis, becomes subdivided a kind with different kinds of people within different people of different sexual orientations then come to have something like species status, even though it's finer grained than a biological species. And here there are some problems of translation. I know in French, Mill's natural kind is translated as espèce naturelle. Of course, kind is meant to be something broader than biological species. But I just wanted to add one more thing. This finer-grained subdivision of subkinds within the human species in the 19th century is giving rise to sexual kinds, to psychiatric kinds, and so on and so on. My argument would be that this is a continuation of subdivisions that had begun in the early 18th century with Linnaeus's first division of Homo into Homo Africanus, Homo Americanus, Homo Europaeus, and so on. So it starts with race, and then it moves into ever more fine-grained ways of subdividing